Thank you, Mr Speaker. The former US Treasury Chief said earlier this month that Brexit was a historic economic error and described the UK Government's economic policy as having been substantially flawed for a number of years. So will the Chancellor finally face up to what the rest of the world concede and admit that leaving the world's largest single market has not only had a significant impact on inflation, but it's also had a deleterious impact on household finances across the country?
I think the issue with that argument is that the UK has actually grown faster than France or Italy since we left the single market. And according to the Managing Director of the IMF, the UK economy is on the right track.
Sir Jake Barrett.
Mr Speaker, I want to thank my right honourable friend for all he has done for people in Rossendale and Darwin to help them through this cost of living crisis. But people are very concerned with what is being described as the mortgage bomb about to go off. Is now the time for him to look at reintroducing a bold Conservative idea of mortgage interest relief at source? Because if we don't help families now, all the other money that we spent to help them will have been wasted if they lose their home.
Chancellor.
Well, no one could have a more doughty champion in Rossendale and Darwin than my right honourable friend, and I listen to what he says carefully. But I think he will understand that those kind of schemes, which involve injecting large amounts of cash into the economy, right now will be inflationary. So much as we sympathise with the difficulties, and we'll do everything we can to help people seeing their mortgage costs go up, we won't do anything that would mean we prolonged inflation.
SNP spokesperson Stuart Halsey.
Mr Speaker, the cost of a 2-year fixed mortgage in March 2021 was 2.57%. This week it reached 6%. Now, given the Chancellor and the Economic Secretary have said there are no plans to change the Bank of England inflation target, meaning the base rate which drives the mortgage rate will continue to rise as inflation stays stubbornly high and mortgages will go up. So, in the absence of that change, what is it that the government plan to do to actually tackle the mortgage pain people are suffering from?
Chancellor.
The first thing I would say to him is that what he's talking about is something that's being experienced across the world, and in fact interest rates have risen faster in the United States and Canada than they have here. The answer is we'll look at doing everything we can to help people under pressure, but we won't do things that will prolong the inflationary agony that people are going through. And we have to be very careful, because a lot of the schemes that are being proposed would actually make inflation worse and not better.
Stuart Halsey.
Inflation. The OBR said in March inflation was due to peak at 2.9% at the end of this year. By May, the Bank of England have forecasted it would be 5% at the end of this year, almost double in the space of 2 months. So given inflation headline is still, 8.7%, food inflation is 16.5%, will the Chancellor guarantee today that inflation will be halved to 5%, as promised by the Prime Minister in January this year?
Chancellor.
The IMF, the OBR and the Bank of England all predict that we will hit our target to halve inflation, and I give him this guarantee: we will stick to the plan to do so.
Right, Gerald Jones.
Question 3, please, Mr Speaker.
Minister.
With permission, Mr Speaker, I'd like to answer this question together with questions number 9 and 10. We recognise that this is a concerning time for homeowners and mortgage holders. We can't ignore the fact, much as though some may wish to, that interest rates have risen across Western economies as a result of the COVID pandemic and the impact of war in Ukraine. The Bank of England sets the base rate, which can have an effect on mortgage pricing, and the bank's been independent since the decision of the then Labour government in 1997. We remain committed to responsible management to bring inflation under control, which is the only sustainable way to lower interest rates and lower mortgage rates.
Gerald Jones.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The former Prime Minister has apologised for the mistakes in her so-called growth plan and the damage it caused. Families across the UK will soon start paying thousands more in mortgage interest payments, and given the Prime Minister's comments yesterday, it appears there's little or no further support coming. So will the Minister join the former Prime Minister and apologise to the nation for the impact of the party opposite's misguided economic experience?
Mr. Speaker, much as though the opposition would prefer this not to be the case, this is a fact that is impacting across Western economies. Although market-to-market comparisons are not always easy, in the United States of America, the average 30-year mortgage has increased now to above 6%. As I said previously, this government will do what it can sustainably to lower interest rates and thereby ease the burden on mortgage holders.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this is the second time that I'm putting it to the government that the Conservatives are no longer the party of home ownership, and I don't think it will be the last time either. And I say this because the average interest rate on a new 2-year fixed mortgage is now above 6%. Now, the Chancellor has already said that they will do everything they can do, but what does this actually mean? Because the public would like to know.
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I thank the honourable lady for her question. Not only are we taking action, taking the tough decisions to sustainably improve the nation's finances, but we're also working, and the Chancellor and I regularly meet with the mortgage industry, with lenders, about the support that they can provide to mortgage holders if they do get into financial difficulties. A range of measures that include term extensions, a switch to interest-only payment holidays, and the FCA guidance is very clear that any repossessions, and they are currently running at a historical low, any repossessions should be an absolute last resort.
Mr. Jolly.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. As a result of the 6% we've already heard about, more than 1 million households on flexible rate mortgages have already faced increases this year, and 1.8 million more will see their fixed rate deals come to an end and face increases in this year. And it's not just homeowners. The knock-on effect has meant that in my constituency in Edinburgh, we've had the highest rental inflation anywhere in the country at 13.7% in the last financial year because landlords are facing increases in their mortgages. Now, the government has said it's willing to support people, so would it be willing to consider the Liberal Democrats' idea of a mortgage protection fund to protect those on lowest incomes and support those who are struggling?
Well, I thank the honourable member for Edinburgh East for her question. Regrettably, the proposal that she and her party puts forward would not only delay the point at which we're able to bear down on inflation to deliver the nation's mortgage holders the lower interest that they need, but it would also, and the honourable member raised the point of private renters, it would do nothing, as I understand their proposal, for the plight of private renters.
Baldwin, Chair of the Committee.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And the growth plan in September obviously did have an impact on the mortgage market. But is the Economic Secretary aware that by November, when he gave evidence to our committee, the Bank of England governor actually said that the increases in mortgages henceforth were really down to the Bank of England's own increases because that temporary effect from the growth plan had dissipated. And increases since then have been largely due to the fact that inflation has been worse than the bank was forecasting. And did the Economic Secretary note that this week I received a letter from the Chair of Court at the Bank of England saying that they are going to undertake the request that I sent them to have a look at their inflation modelling and why it's been incorrect?
Minister.
Not for the first time, Mr. Speaker. The chair of the Select Committee is on the money in her understanding of what is actually driving the markets and her own advocacy and champion for the fact that our lending banks need to do a good job, not just for mortgage holders, but also for savers. And that's something I'm very happy to meet with the honourable lady to talk about how we can make sure that they do the best job they can.
Richard Fuller.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Minister in his earlier reply talked about mortgages in the United States, and he will know that in the United States it is quite common to fix a mortgage for 15 or 30 years, which gives certainty about monthly repayments and, of course, can be refinanced if mortgage rates go down over the period and term of the mortgage. I understand that the UK Treasury looked at the UK mortgage market for introducing such long-term fixed rates and found that at that time there wasn't much potential. Will he consider looking at that again?
I thank the honourable member for his question, as ever. apposite when it comes to Treasury matters. There are indeed, Mr. Speaker, long-term fixed-rate mortgages on the market. I have taken advice from officials on that. The constraining factor is actually consumer demand. That's not a pattern of behaviour that we've seen. But clearly for some mortgage holders, that does offer the long-term certainty. And it's certainly my objective that we see the broadest range of choices for householders for their own individual fact patterns in the market.
Jonathan Gove.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mortgage payers in Stoke-on-Trent, North Kidsgrove and Torque are rightly worried at this moment in time with the impending rebrokering that they are facing. And to support what my right honourable friend, the member for Rosendale and Darwin, said earlier, is it not time to return to a Conservative principle of introducing a MIRAS-type scheme which allows borrowers tax relief for interest payments on their mortgages?
Minister.
Well, I always listen enormously carefully to the very powerful advocacy for Stoke-on-Trent and the fact that his constituents put their trust in this government. But one of the things that they put their trust in is that this government wouldn't come forward with the sort of unfunded spending commitments that we see on the benches opposite that would be disastrous for his constituents because it would see inflation be higher for longer.
Shadow Minister Pat McFadden.
Speaker, the only thing that grew as a result of what the government did last September was people's mortgage payments. 2-year fixed rates, now over 6%. Payments for householders up 2,900 over the next year. Has the government learnt the lesson from Minister's decision, and I stress decision, nothing to do with international events, to use the country for a giant economic experiment that hurt homeowners, pushed up interest rates and shook international confidence in the United Kingdom? And if they have, will the Minister now apologise to the householders who are paying the price for that mistake?
Minister.
As ever, I listen very carefully to the right honourable member's rhetoric. I'd ask him if he's learnt the lesson that we saw from the last Labour government that spent its way through the nation's finances and whose most lasting contribution to the economy that we inherited was a note from the previous Chief Secretary saying there is no money left.
Mr. Speaker, back to 2023. This is a real crisis affecting real people as a result of his government's real decisions. Now, figures out today show that the average UK tenant is spending over 28% of their income on rent, and that rents have gone up by over 10% in the past year. Rents are being forced up because the landlords that people rent from are seeing their mortgages go up too, sometimes even faster than mortgages in general. Now, the Chancellor and the Prime Minister were supposed to be the team that would come in and sort everything out. Can the Minister tell us what went wrong?
Minister.
Well, what went right, Mr. Speaker, is the fact that we on this side of the House not only will always focus on the stability of the nation's finances to get inflation and interest rates falling further and faster than the opposition would, but also, even within that envelope, we found fit to find £3,300 on average of support for households last winter and the upcoming winter, something that will make a very significant impact into the difficulties that mortgage holders and renters are facing because of the higher interest rates that are a feature across the Western world.
Rachel Hopkins.
Number 4, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government undertakes extensive assessment of the effectiveness of the sanction regimes, which are eroding Russia's financial base. We have 28 Russian banks covering 80% of Russia's banking sector sanctioned, and over 18 billion of Russian assets, and implemented unprecedented trade sanctions in addition to that.
Rachel Hopkins.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Constituents in Luton South have raised concerns about the financial sanctions regime with me. So can the government confirm if it's still the case that Russian account holders in the UK can hold £50,000 or more in their accounts? And what is to prevent individuals of concern simply parcelling up assets through proxies into a large network of accounts below the permitted level?
Minister.
Well, the Office of Financial Sanctions Implementation works very closely with our allies across the G7 to ensure that we have coordinated action amongst our international partners on this unprecedented package of sanctions. We've frozen the assets of 1,600 individuals and entities. We've implemented 35 different sanction regimes across government. I'd be very happy to address the specific question she's asked, because obviously that is quite technical. I'm very happy to take it away for her.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. A multi-million-pound start-up project that could be transformational in my constituency is now at risk because the Office of Financial Sanctions implementation is yet to process an asset freeze licence application in respect of just 0.002% of the company's capital, which was submitted in April. What steps is the Minister taking to ensure that such applications are dealt with swiftly? And if I provide him the details of the company, will he ensure that its progress is expedited?
Minister.
Well, I'm very happy to take up my right honourable friend's case. We have expanded the OFSI resources. We have a monthly monitoring and efficiency dashboard. But I accept very much how frustrating it can be for constituents' businesses when such situations arise, and I'm very happy to take it away and swiftly get back to him.
Shadow Minister James Murray.
Mr. Speaker, as the war in Ukraine continues, we must not let up for a second on efforts to tighten the net on the accomplices and beneficiaries of Putin's regime. Now, we welcome the direction of the measures announced yesterday. So can the Minister confirm whether these measures will close all loopholes and specifically ownership thresholds which Russian oligarchs and their enablers have been able to exploit to evade the bite of sanctions?
Minister.
What I can say to the honourable gentleman, this government will be relentless in its pursuit of illicit assets. We've, as I said, sanctioned 24 banks with global assets of over 940 billion. And 120 elites with a combined net worth of over 140 billion. And working closely with our allies, incrementally and sequentially, we've tightened that net. And we've immobilised over 60% of Putin's war chest of foreign reserves, worth £275 billion. We continue to work closely with our allies to intensify those as opportunities arise.
Robert Sims.
I have one or two constituents in Poole who've lost their job because they were in companies which were owned by Russians that were sanctioned, and they've been finding difficulty having an orderly wind-up because banks run a mile from loaning a reasonable amount of money to sort out some of the businesses. And I know one situation where people haven't been able to get P60s because they haven't been able to pay the accountants who would have produced them because they can't get money from any of the banks because they don't want to be involved in anything to do with sanctions. So perhaps I may have a word with the individual about that, with the Minister, because I do think in some cases we're going over the top and it's affecting our constituents.
Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for his question. I think the points raised demonstrate how serious and extensive the government actions are in regard to this. But I recognise the unfortunate situations that sometimes arise, and I'm very happy to look at that case and take it back to OFSI.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pursuing the issue of proxies raised by my honourable friend, the member for Luton South, am I right in thinking that what the Minister said a few minutes ago was that he was prepared to examine the possibility of taking action against proxies and those persons of interest who use proxies?
Well, what I would say is this government is committed to an ever tighter grip on illicit finance and those individuals close to Putin who make a material contribution to his regime. Obviously, on the floor of the House, I'm not going to commit to individual extensions to what we've already done, but I've set out the range of sanction regimes that exist across multiple departments of government, and I'm very happy to receive representations on whatever case he wishes to bring to me.
Bob Blackman.
Question number 6, Mr. Speaker.
Well, my honourable friend is a strong champion in support of consumers who've suffered financial loss, particularly through his chairmanship of the all-party parliamentary group on personal banking and fairer financial services. He understands that the UK does not operate a zero-loss regime where consumers of financial services are automatically compensated, but it is important that regulators make very clear where the scope of protection lies and who is eligible for compensation.
Rob Blackman.
I thank my honourable friend for that answer, and clearly it's important that where the Ombudsman recommends that compensation be paid, clearly banks have to do so. But equally, the government, of course, should also pay compensation when the Parliamentary Ombudsman found against them in terms of extra life policyholders, as mentioned by the Honourable Member for Strangford. I understand that the budget to pay compensation to extra life policyholders is some £300 million underspent. So will he, rather than return the money to the Treasury, use that money to compensate the people that have suffered in the long term as extra life policyholders?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, we set out the terms of that settlement in 2010, and there's nothing to update the House on today.
Nick Smith.
Mr. Speaker, for over 5 years I've campaigned on behalf of steelworkers who were part of the British Steel pension scheme. Many were ripped off by sharks posing as financial advisors. Now, whilst the redress scheme is now in place, legal advisors for steelworkers report claim processing delays of 6 months at the Financial Conduct Authority, 12 months at the Financial Services Compensation Scheme, and 2 years at the Financial Ombudsman's Service. That's just not right. Cases being delayed can have a big impact on possible payouts. So will the Minister please look into the performance of these organisations? Steelworkers and other financial consumers deserve much better than this.
Yes, I will. I've had conversations with my honourable friend, honourable member, previously about that, and I will take up the case of unwarranted delays if that's the case.
Alexander Stafford.
Number 8, sir.
With permission, Mr. Speaker, I'd like to take this with number 15. I've set out our national ambition to be the world's next Silicon Valley, and we are making good progress, last year being ranked as the world's 3rd largest technology market after the United States and China.
Alexander Stafford.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Ultimate Battery and Thurcroft in Rother Valley are developing new groundbreaking battery technologies and are on track to create 500 new jobs by 2025. What help can the Minister's Department give me and also my constituents to help burgeoning businesses such as Ultimate Battery to make sure that Rother Valley and across the north are technology hubs?
Chancellor.
Well, I'd like to thank him for his support in Rother Valley for this really important sector, and we do have a number of schemes. There's £541 million of funding in the Faraday Battery Challenge that's available, and we also have the £1 billion Automotive Transformation Fund. But as a result of the efforts that he and many others have made, we're now getting 40% of our electricity from renewable sources. That's the 2nd highest in Europe, with much more progress to come.
Laura Fires.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I recently convened a roundtable in my constituency between the Science Minister and a number of science and tech businesses, and their number one ask was what fiscal support was available for their sector. Now, I'm aware that there are numerous schemes of grants and tax relief, but it was notable to me that this was not well understood by the businesses, and I couldn't find it published anywhere on the new department's website either. So could I ask my right honourable friend to put together and publish a package of all the support that is available to investors and to innovators, and how that these can be applied for so that we can maximise the potential of this vital new frontier in West Berkshire and beyond?
It's a very fair point, and I want to first of all thank her for the fact that Newbury is a hotbed of technology businesses. I think you've got Rock Technologies, Stryker, Edwards Life Sciences, and a range of other businesses that I know the Honourable Lady gives a lot of support to. I will write to her listing all those things, and then I will make sure that it is available on the website of the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology.
Tim Farrell.
Speaker, the tech sector in rural Cumbria depends obviously on reliable broadband, and yet communities in Warcop, Sandford, Coupland-Beck, Blea Tarn and Ormside in Westmoreland who have signed up to the community interest company and volunteer group Barn to provide a gigabit connection for just £33 a month, but the communities have been suddenly designated a low priority area, meaning that their vouchers have been removed, putting the whole system and the whole project at risk. I wonder if the Minister would commit, the Chancellor would commit, to supporting those communities and the residents and businesses within them, ensuring that they get the vouchers that they were initially promised.
Well, I will happily look into what's happened. We strongly support all rural areas having access to gigabit broadband. It's a very important part of our policy. We made a lot of progress in that area. I'll look into the details of what's happening in his area and get back to him.
Ben Lake.
Question number 11, sir.
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, hospitality businesses play an important role
in local communities and the UK economy. They benefit from business rates support worth £13.6 billion over the next 5 years, which includes an increased generosity for the retail, hospitality and leisure relief scheme from 50% to 75% in 2023-24. And of course, there is our Brexit pub guarantee, which means the duty on a draft pint in a pub will always be lower than its equivalent in the supermarket.
Mr. Speaker, I'm very grateful to the Minister for that answer. She will be aware, of course, of long-standing calls from the sector for reducing the rate of VAT to bring it in line with European equivalents. Would it be possible at all for the Treasury to undertake an assessment of the economic benefits of doing so, and perhaps also consider as a package increasing the threshold for VAT registration from £85,000 to £100,000 to support smaller businesses?
Well, Mr. Speaker, the right honourable gentleman poses many questions for me, some of which are very complicated. In short, in relation to the VAT relief for the hospitality sector, it was really important we did that in the aftermath of the pandemic, but it cost us a great deal of money, and so we've had to raise it back up to 20%. In relation to other VAT matters, of course, we keep these under review, and I'd be delighted to meet him to discuss some of the complexities behind this with him.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When I look at the new job opportunities and career paths that are being created in Pembrokeshire, a great many of those are being created in the tourism and hospitality sector. Does my honourable friend agree with me that the very last thing that business people who are creating those growth opportunities need right now is a tourism tax of the kind being brought forward by the Welsh Labour government in Cardiff that will hit these businesses with new burdens and raise the cost for going on holiday in Wales?
Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, the sun always shines in my right honourable friend's corner of Pembrokeshire when he speaks up for it. And he's quite right to identify how the Conservatives in government are trying to help these businesses through our business rates relief in England, through our energy support scheme over recent months, and of course through the Brexit pub guarantee. Welsh Labour, on the other hand, wants to call last orders and have higher taxes for those businesses he's so keen to support.
The Shadow Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The 2019 Conservative Manifesto, some 3 Prime Ministers ago and 4 Chancellors ago, promised a fundamental reform of business rates. This is another broken Tory promise. Will the Minister admit that only a Labour government will end the chaos, scrap business rates and replace them with a fairer system so that our amazing hospitality sector can thrive and grow faster?
Well, I have a great deal of respect for the Honourable Lady. I must point out to her gently that we have in fact conducted that review, and in the autumn statement we were able to announce a £13.6 billion package of help over the next 5 years, including a multiplier freeze for all ratepayers large and small, a transitional relief cap that is funded by the Exchequer, as well as retail, hospitality and leisure relief, and a small business support scheme, which will help cap bill increases at £600 per year for businesses losing eligibility for some or all small businesses, or the rural rate relief for the 2023 evaluation. We've done that review and we're supporting those businesses that need the help.
Alan Brown.
Question 13, Mr. Speaker.
Minister, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With permission, I would like to answer questions 13 and 22 together. Advanced economies around the world are sharing in the challenge of high inflation from the energy shock, and the UK has been affected by these global factors. The government has taken significant action to help households with rising energy prices and the cost of living by providing a significant support package totalling £94 billion. This includes supporting households with energy bills by extending the energy price guarantee and removing the premium paid by 4 million households using prepayment meters. Overall, the government has paid about half of a typical household bill since October 22.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Many people in the Highlands and Islands of Scotland will have their taxes used to help pay for the construction of the gas grid, despite the fact that they're actually off the gas grid themselves and don't actually get the benefits of being connected to the gas grid. Their area supplies the oil and gas and now the cheap renewable energy that's facilitating lower energy bills across Great Britain, but yet these people are more likely to be fuel poor, and to rub salt in the wounds, many pay a surcharge on their electricity bills. So when's the UK government going to address these inequities?
I'm very grateful to the honourable gentleman. I would simply point out that across the United Kingdom we've provided extensive support, as I said in my answer to the substantive. I'm very happy to write to him with details on his specific point.
Dave Jewett.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. When the Energy Profits Levy was introduced to help this government's support of household energy bills, I welcomed the investment tax allowance that was introduced along with it on new oil and gas for energy security. In recent weeks, I also welcomed the Exchequer Secretary announcement in Aberdeen of a price floor in the form of an energy security investment mechanism at which the EPL will be removed. The devil, of course, will be in the detail, and while I welcome the Treasury's ongoing engagement and dialogue with the oil and gas industry, can I ask the Minister if he will commit to a regular, perhaps quarterly, fiscal forum with the industry, as used to happen prior to COVID? And does my honourable friend agree that Labour's plans to ban all new oil and gas is based on ideology and not a pragmatic approach to this country's energy security and net zero?
Can I just say, I think you ought to put in for adjournment. It will be easier for all of us. Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, I can think of a few better advocates of the oil and gas industry than my honourable friend. I was very pleased to meet with industry leaders and chair of the Oil and Gas Forum in Aberdeen. Recently, we had a very good discussion. I'm grateful to the industry for their ongoing engagement with ministers and officials. I can assure my friend the government is very committed to engaging with the oil and gas sector, as we have been doing for a long time.
Number 14. Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, as per my previous response on this same question by the honourable gentleman in last Treasury orals, I would note that the UK has grown at a similar rate to comparable European economies since 2016, and that it still remains challenging to separate out the effects of Brexit and wider global trends on the UK economy, but we remain absolutely committed to seizing the opportunities that we now have free from the EU.
Mr Speaker, yes, that's very convenient. Only the UK has to deal with Brexit. Everyone's had to deal with COVID. Everyone's had to deal with Ukraine. Only the UK has had to deal with Brexit. And that's why the LSE says that customers have paid collectively almost £7 billion extra on their food bills as a direct result of all the checks and frustrations that have come with Brexit. Is she honestly saying that it was a good idea and that it's not hurt the UK economy?
Minister.
Well, again, I would just gently remind the honourable gentleman to look at what is happening in the rest of the EU. So, for example, the EU zone is suffering from the effects of mild recession. These are because of the global headwinds we are all facing. I know he will be delighted at the recent upgrades in growth by the OBR, the Bank of England, and the OECD. The truth is that we face these challenges. We, of course, have to work with our global counterparts to try to address these global headwinds, but we are very much focused on the Prime Minister's priority of halving inflation, because that is what will make the real differences to our constituents.
John Burrell.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Furthermore, does the Minister agree with me that despite Project Fair forecasts, we have record employment, very low unemployment, good inward investment and trade deals in abundance? And perhaps the SNB should focus on its poor record on the economy and indeed financial transparency and get over the fact that we've left the EU.
Well, my honourable friend puts it very succinctly, and may I take this opportunity to congratulate him on his recent honour. Very well deserved. He puts it very succinctly. We have a really exciting future ahead of us. We're already signing trade deals with non-EU countries. We have this fantastic deal with the EU. It's now up to us to make a real success of this.
Peter Alden.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. Number 16.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Government recognises the challenges facing households due to the elevated costs of living and took further action at spring budget this year to provide targeted support to protect the most vulnerable. This included the new cost of living payments in this year, support with the cost of essentials through a further extension to the Household Support Fund in England, and upgrading benefits in line with inflation in April this year.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I'm most grateful to my honourable friend for that answer. One of the best ways to support those on low incomes is to remove those barriers that prevent them from acquiring the new skills that are necessary for better paid jobs. Can my right honourable friend confirm that the Treasury is working closely with the Department for Education and the DWP to ensure that the Lifelong Learning Bill gets rid of those obstacles? And can she also provide an update on the progress of the Barber Review?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I know how you like ministers to answer shortly, so if I may, I'll answer the first part and come back to him on the Barber review in writing. First of all, my right honourable friend, the Chancellor, put employment as one of the 4 E's in his drive for growth in the spring budget, and we are working very closely with the Department for Education to invest in exactly the way he describes, including free courses for jobs which enable high-value level 3 subjects to have free qualifications, and also employer-led skills boot camps in high-growth areas, a phrase I never thought I'd find myself saying, but those are apparently for sectors such as digital and other growth sectors available to those who are unemployed or in work and want to retrain.
Dr. Rupert.
Speaker, food banks, playgroups and warm spaces are among the services that have been provided by mosques, temples, synagogues and churches to all our constituents to cope with this cost of living crisis. But the buildings they're in are often creaking and falling apart. So I wondered if ministers would consider extending Gordon Brown's original policy for VAT relief on building works for listed places of worship to all of them, to recognise their role in social good and alleviating pressure on multiple systems.
I think you're right.
Well, may I thank the Honourable Lady for raising an important point. And there has been an incredible outpouring of support across communities, not just in religious communities, but also in village and town halls around the United Kingdom to try to help people with the cost of living pressures that we're facing over this winter. I understand the point she makes. If I may, it's quite a complicated picture, but perhaps I can write to her with a fuller response on that, because I want to do it justice in my response, Mr. Speaker, and I know I'll get into trouble with you.
Richard Bergen, then.
Question number 17, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are 3 things the government's doing to reduce inflation. Firstly, remaining steadfast in our support of the independent MPC at the Bank of England as they take action to return inflation to its target of 2%. Secondly, making difficult but responsible decisions on tax and spending, so we're not adding fuel to the fire. And thirdly, tackling high energy prices by holding down energy bills for households and businesses alongside investing in long-term energy security.
Richard Berg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The rich and powerful have repeatedly sought to blame workers for high inflation, even though workers' real wages have been falling as inflation soars. But many leading economists now say that the profiteering of certain corporations is driving price rises, not wages. The French government has taken action to limit food prices. Spain has introduced rent controls. When will this government start targeting the profiteering that's helping to drive inflation?
Minister.
Well, we continue to have constructive dialogue with industry in different sectors. I met with the supermarket representatives a few weeks ago. The Chancellor and others in the Treasury will continue to have those conversations. But I think most people recognise that we face global common challenges and different economies will respond in different ways.
Now come to top victuals. John Barrett.
Number 1, Mr. Speaker.
Chancellor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We won't hesitate in our resolve to support the Bank of England as it seeks to strangle inflation in the economy. And the best policy is to stick to our plan to halve it. But I also want to make sure we do everything possible to help families paying higher mortgage rates in ways that do not themselves feed inflation. So later this week I'll be meeting the principal mortgage lenders to ask what help they can give to people struggling to pay the more expensive mortgages and what flexibilities might be possible for families in arrears.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Despite being the gateway to most financial services in the city, the London Stock Exchange, I suggest, is ailing, with CRH and ARM being the latest canaries in the coal mine. Whilst welcoming the Edinburgh reforms, what further consideration has he given to my suggestion that tax incentives be introduced to encourage our British pension funds, the big beasts, to invest more in UK equities, given that since the financial crisis of 2008-9, they've reduced their exposure to equities by 90%, unlike most other developed economies?
Chancellor.
Well, my honourable friend always speaks extremely wisely on financial matters, and he's absolutely on the money when he talks about the opportunity that presents itself from unlocking £3 trillion of pension fund assets. many of which would get a better return for pensioners if they were invested more in our high-growth businesses, as well as that being a good outcome for the London stock market. And all I would say to him is watch this space.
Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While the government squabble over parties and peerages, mortgage products are being withdrawn and replaced by mortgages with much higher interest rates. This is a consequence of the Conservative mini-budget last year and 13 years of economic failure, with inflation higher here than in similar countries. Average mortgage payments will be going up by a crippling £2,900 this year. So where does the Chancellor think that families are going to get the money to pay the Tory mortgage penalty?
Well, let me tell her that we announced at the autumn statement £94 billion of support to help families going through very difficult times. That was more support than was ever proposed by Labour. But I'll tell her what the answer to those pressures is not. It's not borrowing an extra £28 billion a year when people like Paul Johnson are saying more borrowing means higher inflation, higher interest rates and higher mortgage rates.
Rachel Reeves.
Is the Chancellor actually for real? This is the real-life consequences of what is happening under the Conservative government today. So don't try and pass the buck. Let me bring this home. In Selby and Ainsty, 12,000 households will be paying an average of £2,700 more on their mortgages. In Uxbridge and South Ruislip, 10,000 households will be paying on average £5,200 more. Each and every family knows who is responsible for trashing the economy. It is the Conservative Party. So will the Chancellor apologise for the harm that his government have caused with the Tory mortgage penalty?
I am proud of our economic record, which has seen our economy grow faster than France or Japan since 2010, the same rate as Germany. And let me say that those mortgage holders in Selby or Uxbridge or Mid-Bedfordshire will be paying even more for their mortgages if the government under a Labour Party borrowed £100 billion more in the next Parliament, and we won't let that happen.
Greg Tracy.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as the Minister knows, having a strong insurance and financial services sector is vital to the growth of our economy, which is one of the Prime Minister's 5 pledges. So can he confirm that he's doing everything in his powers to make that happen, particularly with a view to our international competitiveness in these key sectors?
I can give my honourable friend the assurance he seeks. He will know from his significant contribution to the Financial Services and Markets Bill as it's gone through this House that it does introduce a new duty on our financial regulators to promote the growth and international competitiveness of the United Kingdom. But alongside that, it also, thanks to my honourable friend, has specific reporting measures as to how they're going to achieve that important objective.
Ian Byrne.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Recently, I met with the Minister for Schools and presented him with his costed proposal for a pilot of universal free school meals in Liverpool. The Minister said he wasn't ideologically opposed to this, but that all roads lead to the Treasury, for where we are. Will the Chancellor work with me and the Minister to enable this pilot, which would transform the education, health and well-being of thousands of children across my great city?
Hear, hear.
Who wants it?
I'll happily write to him to talk to him about that particular initiative. What I would say to him is we are making great progress in our schools. We've risen to 4th in the global league tables when it comes to reading, but we can always do more.
Sir David Evans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I welcome my right honourable friend's commitment to making inflation and the cost of living his top priority. This is also a top priority of my constituents in Bexley Heath and Crayford. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that the IFS is entirely correct that Labour's plans for £28 billion of borrowing in their Green Prosperity Plan would simply lead to higher rates of interest and higher inflation?
Chancellor.
My right honourable friend is absolutely right. The answer to inflation is to tackle it, not to make it worse.
Ian Lavery.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Wages in real terms are lower now than what they were in 2008. It's an absolute disgrace, Mr. Speaker. The North East has been hit harder than other regions, and worst of all for child poverty. The child poverty rates have shot up, resulting in 67% of children
in working families living in poverty? Is the Chancellor's deliberate, brutal policy of wage suppression working? If so, who for?
Chancellor. Let me say to the honourable gentleman that we understand the pressures that families are going through up and down the country, but we have responded not only with generous support this year and last of over £3,000 for the average household, but since 2010, the number of children in absolute poverty has fallen by 400,000.
Paying around half the cost of people's energy bills and freezing fuel duty has been crucial in helping people with the cost of living, but is there further action the government can take to get inflation down, and are we on track to halve it by the end of the year?
It's a relentless activity to control public spending and to ensure that the interventions we're making prioritise growth enablement. The Household Support Fund of £2.5 billion continues to be an additional source of support for households, but there aren't quick fixes. There is a relentless pursuit of the goals that we've set out at the start of this year.
Chris Elmore.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. How on earth can the Chancellor begin to understand the worries of ordinary homeowners when in 2018 it had seemingly slipped his mind to declare that he had spent £3.5 million buying 7 luxury flats as an investment opportunity in Southampton? Isn't the reality, Mr. Speaker, that him and the Treasury front bench are completely out of touch with what homeowners are facing?
Councillor. With respect to the honourable gentleman, I think he should get his facts right before making that kind of suggestion. He got them wrong.
Thanks for Thursday. And a Firth.
Mr. Speaker, in-person banking facilities are vitally important to everyone in Southend West, yet in recent years we've lost all but one of our bank branches. There's now a new community-based post office banking hub model being rolled out, so would the Minister support my efforts to get one of these into Leigh-on-Sea?
Yes.
Well, I thank the young woman for her question. She will know that as part of the Financial Services and Markets Bill, I can update the House that the government's moved an amendment to protect free access to cash withdrawal and deposit facility. But I'd be very happy to meet with my honourable friend to discuss her own individual constituency's needs.
Mr. Carmichael.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I remind the House of my entry in the Register of Members' Interests. Government recent pronouncements in relation to food security have been very welcome, but if they are to be meaningful, then farmers and crofters need certainty about the future state of government support and, critically, the amount of money that will be available to fund that. So can the Chancellor tell us when he will engage with DEFRA and the devolved administrations about the size of the budget that will be available, and if in the meantime he would meet with me in the NFUS?
Well, as he knows, that the farming support payment is ported to Scotland, and it operates on a different basis because it's devolved. We've committed to the £2.4 billion for the duration of this Parliament, and there are a number of schemes where the uptake is now increasing. I will continue to engage with my colleagues from DEFRA as those schemes develop further.
Mary Robinson.
Mr. Speaker, the last bank in the entirety of Cheadle constituency is about to close. So I was delighted when, following my interventions and direct conversations with Link and appeals from the community, that Bramall was Link's 100th banking hub recommendation. This will be invaluable for residents, but until it opens, my residents will be left without banking services. Would my honourable friend please look into bridging options for the interim between bank closures and hub openings, or consider imposing requirements for banks to remain open until a hub is implemented?
I'll be very happy to meet with my honourable friend to talk about the range of options. I'm delighted about the solution that is being proposed for Bramall in her own constituency, as I was to visit the new banking hub in the constituency, the honourable member for Ealing Central and Acton last week, and I hope the whole House would wish the operator Vip Varsani well in that new endeavour.
Sir Christopher Brown.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For the first time in my 20 years as an MP, we have a real housing crisis in the Rhondda. 2/3 of people own their own homes, but lots of people who've relied on the commercial rented sector are finding that landlords, because of decisions made about taxation, are selling their properties, and because there's a cap on housing benefit, they're not wanting to continue in that market. We have dozens of people being evicted week in, week out at the moment. Will the government please look very closely at what is happening in constituencies such as mine to protect people so that they can keep their own homes?
Well, Minister.
I'm very happy to meet with the honourable gentleman to discuss what's happening in his constituency. Obviously, there have been a series of changes since the Section 24 change in the Finance Act in 2015, and obviously particular pressures in the housing economy at the moment. But I'm happy to meet with him to discuss it further.
Matt Hancock.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I welcome the work that the Chancellor and Prime Minister have done to promote the work here of artificial intelligence and developing an ecosystem for that. It's clear that the UK has got an opportunity to really lead on this, especially on regulation, if we get it right, but only if we seize that opportunity now. What's the Chancellor doing to make that happen?
Chancellor.
Well, my right honourable friend is right to say this is a big opportunity. We're home to a third of Europe's AI startups, but we are very aware of the risks of AI. So what the government is doing is hosting a global AI summit with the support of President Biden this autumn to make sure we get that regulation absolutely right.
Samuel.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Quite rightly, this question time has been dominated by questions on inflation and cost of living. But one policy which has not been mentioned is the government's net zero policy and the inflationary costs included in it, from green levies of 12 billion to the cost of strengthening the infrastructure and also the favourable treatment to renewable energy firms. While the Minister may condemn the Labour Party for its 29 billion spending on green policies, what is the cost of net zero policies to consumers, and is it not picking their pockets dry?
Well, Mr. Speaker, we have a world-leading track record on net zero, but we have to have the correct balance between who bears the costs. And the critical to the nature of his question is mobilising more private capital, and we are making great strides on that point.
Peter Gibson.
Mr. Speaker, can my right honourable friend update the House as to when we will see spades in the ground on the Brunswick site in Darlington for the Darlington Economic Campus?
Minister.
Well, my honourable friend is a great champion for Darlington, and Darlington's economic campus is a critical part of levelling up. The Government Property Agency have been working hard to finalise commercial negotiations, and I'm very happy to write to my honourable friend when I have a more substantive update.
Mr. Speaker, ever-increasing food prices mean that some families are having to cut down on the amount they eat. So will the Minister support Labour's plan to negotiate a new veterinary agreement for agriculture products to reduce the cost for food producers and bring down those crippling food prices?
Who wants a chance?
We'll always look at Labour policies, but they're normally not right.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Clear policy direction and a strong regulatory framework has led to the UK being the world's leading centre in fintech. Does my honourable friend agree that the crypto industry offers the same opportunity to the UK to exploit?
Minister.
Well, my right honourable friend is absolutely right. I was pleased to join him in a Westminster Hall debate about the regulation of the crypto asset sector. I commend the work done in this House by the all-party parliamentary group on crypto assets. And he might join me in welcoming the decision by Andreessen Horowitz, one of the world's largest technology companies, to locate their only international office outside of San Francisco here in the UK and to run their 2024 crypto asset school here.
Exercise Cygnus in 2016 tested the country's preparedness for a pandemic. Was the government's response at that time adequate, and what can he do in his current role to make sure that we're properly prepared in the future?
Chancellor.
Well, I am looking forward to answering questions about that tomorrow afternoon at the COVID inquiry. What I would say to him is that I think we did what was recommended following Operation Cygnus. Certainly ministers did what they were advised to do, but it was focused on pandemic flu. And the question we have to ask ourselves is why we didn't have a broader focus on the different types of pandemic that could have happened, such as COVID.
Daisy Cooper.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government's business rates review last autumn was anything but fundamental because it didn't even look at the calculations for fair and maintainable trade, which are hammering the viability of pubs in St Albans. So if the Chancellor has in fact abandoned his commitment for a fundamental review of business rates, which he himself called for last summer, will he at least look at the calculations for fair and maintainable trade before any more of our valuable pubs have to close?
Minister.
as I say, we conducted a review, and we had the £13.6 billion package of support to help businesses on our high streets. If she's able to look at, for example, the multiplier freeze, that has a significant impact on those rates, as does the retail, hospitality and leisure relief, which will help raise the rate of relief from 50% to 75%. We've targeted this very carefully at exactly the businesses she's raising.
Patrick Reid.
Speaker, the Chancellor was shaking his head during my question earlier on, so I wonder if he can say whether or not he accepts the findings from the London School of Economics Centre for Economic Performance that shows that Brexit is responsible for a third of UK price inflation since 2019. Regulatory, sanitary and other border checks added almost £7 billion to total domestic grocery bills over the period from December 2019 to March 2023. Does he accept that or not?
No.
Jim Shannon.
You first.
Right, let's move on. Right. That completes questions. We will start with the urgent question in a second and let the front bench team go. Right, let us start with the urgent question. Jim Shannon.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. They asked the Minister for Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Affairs to make a statement about the attack on the Lubeira Secondary School in Uganda on the 16th of June. Thanks very much.
Minister.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And at the outset, may I thank my honourable friend for raising this important matter and the courtesy with which he has taken the trouble to inform my office. On Thursday, the 16th of June, Mr Speaker, there was an horrific and cowardly attack on Lubeira Secondary School in Mupondwe in western Uganda, bordering the Democratic Republic of Congo. The government of Uganda have confirmed that 42 people were killed, of which 37 are students from the school. 6 people were injured. There are also reports that a further 5 to 7 people, which may include children from the school, were abducted. The Ugandan authorities believe the perpetrators are from the Islamic State-affiliated armed group, the Allied Democratic Forces, ADF, that operate in the DRC. The Ugandan military are pursuing the attackers. Those responsible for this attack must be brought to justice. I issued a tweet on the 17th of June expressing my horror at the attack which took the lives of so many innocent school children. My condolences go out to all the victims and to their families. The British government strongly condemns this attack. We have confirmed, Mr Speaker, that no British nationals were caught up in the attack. In response to this attack, the Foreign Office updated its travel advice for Uganda on the 17th of June with a factual update. The British High Commissioner in Kampala issued a tweet sending her condolences to all those affected. The British High Commission in Kampala remain in close touch with the Ugandan authorities.
Jim Shannon.
First of all, can I thank the Minister very much for his response. He encapsulates the horror that we have, Mr Speaker, and the concerns we have, and thank him very much for that and for his obvious interest, which we know he has anyway, but today the Honourable Gentleman has proven that. I'm sure the whole House will join me in expressing our deepest sorrow and sympathies for the victims of Friday's abhorrent attack. I want to put on record the full magnitude of what occurred. On Friday, 42 people, including 37 students, were killed when militants from the ADF, which is affiliated with ISIS Central African Province, attacked the Lubeira Secondary School. Some of the victims were murdered with machetes, while others were killed in their dormitories after the terrorists threw bombs and set the building alight after students barricaded the doors to try and protect themselves. 6 additional students were kidnapped to carry loot stolen from the school. It is estimated, Mr Speaker, that some of those may be young girls and ladies. The effect of this act of terror is clear. Many of the town's residents have fled since the attack. Yesterday's schools across the region were empty as teachers and students feared turning up. While IS Central African Province has yet to claim the attack, This is not unusual, and it carries all the hallmarks of the group. Moreover, there's a part of a trend of escalating attacks by the group targeting Christian villages in the DRC since March, resulting in the deaths of some 400. This attack in Uganda is and spells an alarming development. Additionally, this is part of a wider trend of violence against Christian and religious minority communities stretching across Central Africa. This includes attacks from Daesh, Boko Haram and Fulani militants in Nigeria to intentional targets of places of worship by Al-Shabaab in Somalia, Kenya and Ethiopia. In closing, Mr Speaker, I want to ask the Minister 4 questions. What steps can the FCDO take to help recover those who were kidnapped? What scope is there in the current UK aid budget that can provide emergency relief to displaced communities and help create a safe environment for schools to reopen? Thirdly, when was the latest JICS assessment carried out by the FCDO for the region? And does this reflect the current threat from ISIS Central African province to Christians and minority communities? And fourthly, to prevent future attacks? And thank you very much, Mr Speaker.
Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, my honourable friend has set out the position extremely well. He asks me a number of questions. First of all, in respect of the aid budget, Britain has a significant partnership with Uganda. Last year, something of the order of £30 million. It's spent principally on humanitarian and reproductive health-related issues, but we always keep the humanitarian situation under review, and of course we will continue to do so in this specific case. He asked me about the last JACS report. It is not recent, but I can tell him that before these horrific events we were looking at commissioning another one, and we will pursue that. In respect of what more Britain can do, we are very close touch with the Ugandan authorities, and we will do everything we can to help.
We now come to the Chair of the Select Committee, Alicia Cairns.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And can I congratulate my right and very good friend for securing this urgent question. My condolences go out to all those parents who will be suffering unimaginable horror and fear. The abduction of children is cowardly in the extreme, and I'm sure that the Minister is doing all he can to bring to bear pressure to bring those 6 children home to their families. The Foreign Affairs Committee is gravely concerned about the current situation. We have launched an inquiry into counter-terrorism so that we can look at the situation in countries such as Uganda. We are aware of links between the Allied Democratic Forces and Daesh. So can the Minister please confirm for me, what are we doing to discourage all and any engagement with the Wagner Group? Because we see increasingly too many African countries turning to Wagner in a misplaced effort to counter the rise of organisations such as Daesh. Secondly, can the Minister also please confirm to me what we are doing to tackle border insecurity between Congo and Uganda? This really is a grave situation.
Minister.
Well, I thank the Chairman of the Select Committee, my honourable friend, for what she has said. In respect of her third point, can I make it clear to her that we work very closely on counter-terrorism and regional security, which is a shared priority. In respect of her first point, she is right. This was a horrendous attack on young people and students. A firebomb was thrown into the male student dormitory, and 6 and possibly as many as 12, mostly female students, appear to have been abducted, and 2 others who were taken to a nearby health centre died due to a lack of blood supplies. So she is right to underline the cohort that have suffered so much. And in terms of the disorder on the border, we give very strong support both to the Luanda and the Nairobi peace processes, which are designed to try and do something about the disorder in the eastern DRC, of which I know my honourable friend is extremely well aware.
We now come to Shadow Minister Limborough.
I'm grateful, Mr Speaker, and I want to thank the honourable gentleman from Strangford for securing this urgent question. 42 people dead, 37 children, students remain in terrible danger after being abducted. I struggle to understand the mentality of anyone who deliberately seeks to murder children. The opposition, and I know the whole House, stands in solidarity with the people of Uganda in their grief. Last month, the Shadow Foreign Secretary and I discussed these issues with His Excellency, the Foreign Minister of Uganda. Insecurity in the region is a serious threat to many, many lives. It's also a threat to sustainable development and to UK interests. And sadly, it lacks the international attention that it deserves. The ADF are responsible for frequent massacres and brutality in the DRC. It seems most likely that they are responsible for this atrocity too. And the security situation could grow still more complex as the DRC elections approach this December. Can I press the Minister? What plans does the government have to update our sanctions on the ADF? Is he confident that he has the right resources to map illicit financial flows? And do we understand where we have leverage over those who support the ADF and other armed groups in the area? And finally, how are we engaging with the African Union, the East African Community and the Southern African Development Community to support consensus against insecurity amongst regional states? The ADF and hundreds of other armed groups that terrorise the region must be held to account. The government surely must update our support in solidarity with the people of Uganda.
Minister.
Well, the Honourable Lady makes a number of extremely important points, and I thank her for the tone and the content of her statement. She asked me a number of questions. We are in very close touch with the African Union and SADC, as she asked. I should make it clear that the ADF is designated as a terrorist organisation by Uganda, and the Ugandan Defence Forces are tracking the perpetrators, as the President has made clear. She asks me about illicit financial flows, Mr. Speaker. She will know from the integrated review refresh that tackling these flows of stolen and dirty money is a very high priority for the Prime Minister, and we are actively engaged in working out how we can do more on that front. Finally, in terms of the processes that are engaged, which Britain is supporting, the Nairobi process, to which we have provided funding, is a very important aspect of how we bring some sort of order to the Eastern DRC, which, as she implied and knows well, is a source of enormous worry to all the surrounding regional countries, as well as to us and many others.
Vicky Ford.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to also thank my great and good honourable friend for securing this debate. I've visited schools in Uganda. They should be happy places. They should be safe places. It isn't yet again another tragedy. But I am concerned about rising violence throughout the region, and in particular, since the war started in Sudan, there are really ominous reports of waves of ethnic violence in El Geneina in Darfur. It may be that the RSF is rekindling genocide in Darfur. Genocide has happened there before, and it may be happening again. It's incredibly important that the international community keeps shining a spotlight on this, that we break this culture of impunity, because where one violent organisation thinks they can get away with it in one part of Africa, another violent organisation thinks they will get away with another atrocity in another part of Africa. So will my right honourable friend agree to meet with the members of the Darfur community here in the UK, because they are desperate to help tell people what is going on there right now, and so that they can whistle-blow on what might be genocide again?
Minister.
Well, on my right honourable friend's final point, she will know that I have met recently with the Darfur community, but things have changed since that meeting, so I take on board exactly the point that she is making. And she also makes a point about the war in Sudan, which means that there is the possibility, maybe the likelihood now, that this area of disorder, conflict and humanitarian disaster could stretch from the Middle East right the way down to southern Africa. So she is completely right about that, and also to make it clear that the impunity must not be allowed to stand on this or on any other violent acts that are taking place. I can tell her that the Ugandans are pursuing the perpetrators. The Ugandan Commander-in-Chief of Land Forces has been to the area and was joined by the commander of Operation Shujaa, which is the Ugandan deployment in the eastern DRC specifically to combat the ADF. So I hope that that, in part, is the answer to her question.
SNP spokesperson Drew Hendry.
Mr. Speaker, this is a shocking terrorist crime, and I'd like to put on record my party's condolences to the families of those murdered in this horrific attack. And I must also congratulate the Honourable Member for Strangford for bringing attention to this crime as well. It's had too little of that in my view. Mr. Speaker, the people who carried out this atrocity are not an unknown group. They've already been prescribed as a terrorist organisation by Uganda and the United States of America. So when will the UK government finally join these countries in prescribing them too? And what will the UK government do to support Uganda in response to this attack, and to the ongoing threats that clearly exist there? Lasting solutions can only be achieved by governments in this region with outside support. Investing in peace building and civic society building, military cannot be the only option. So does the Minister agree that it has been a mistake, and it would be a mistake, to keep cutting aid in the sub-Sahara area and indeed worldwide?
Minister. Well, Mr. Speaker, on his final point, we are deploying very large amounts of British taxpayers' money in the area, as he suggests, and we make sure that we are light on our feet and are using this to have good humanitarian effect. And in particular, if he looks at some of the programmes I have recently announced, he will see that they very directly affect the humanitarian position, particularly because for girls and women. And in respect of what Britain is doing to try and ensure there is greater security in the eastern DRC and on the border to which he refers, while we don't ever discuss prescription in advance and other security measures, he may rest assured that the British government is fully engaged, not least through the Nairobi peace process, in doing everything we can to bring back stability to this very troubled part of the world.
Mary Roberts.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And thank the honourable gentleman, the member for Strangford, for bringing this really important question to the House. It's a dastardly and awful attack. It's desperate. But the people living along that border will be fearful of their lives and in a heightened sense of fear and danger. Could my right honourable friend set out what measures we are taking across that border between Congo and Uganda to help those people who are living in fear every day?
Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for her comments. Britain has been heavily engaged both through the Luanda and the Nairobi peace processes in trying to tackle that very problem, and we will continue that engagement until we are finally successful.
Samuel Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And can I also congratulate my colleague on getting this urgent question today. I know that he's been diligent in highlighting these issues, as have so many other organisations like Open Doors, etc., who have highlighted the persecution of Christians and other minority religious groups across the world. I just would like to chide him in one way. Don't fall into BBC speak. These people are not militants, they're terrorists. They're terrorists who have blood on their hands and who engage in the cruelest activities to promote their cause. Could I ask the Minister just two things? First of all, we do have a foreign aid budget. Is there any way in which, because this is not just in Uganda, it's Nigeria and other parts of Central Africa, where almost day and daily these occurrences are happening. How can our aid budget be targeted in such a way as to help those who are victims or who are potential victims? And secondly, because it does seem that some governments, either because they don't have the resources or they don't have the willpower, are not pursuing these terrorists in the way they should. What discussions has he had to ensure that they do take action where it is possible and get help from our own government in doing so.
On his last point, Mr. Speaker, as I said, the Ugandan Commander-in-Chief of Land Forces has been there. The Ugandan army is pursuing the perpetrators. I thought he added very eloquently to the statement and comments of our honourable friend, and I very much agree with what he says. And in terms of the way in which the British development budget is spent, we spend a great deal of time and taxpayers' money on trying to stop conflict starting. Once it's started, stop it, and once it's over, reconciling people. That is the aspect of the budget to which he was referring, and I think it is very effective and gives very good value to the British taxpayer.
Martin Doherty.
I congratulate the Honourable Member for Strangford for bringing this urgent question, something I know he's passionate about. Mr Speaker, we learned from Michael Wong's excellent article in the recent issue of the Foreign Affairs magazine how the M23 paramilitary organisation, which is actively destabilising areas of both the DRC and Uganda, has been given direct economic and military aid supported by the Rwandan government, in a deliberate strategy of President Paul Kagame, similar to that which they abandoned under pressure in 2012. So, given the leverage that this government now has with that regime, can I ask what assurances the Minister, and I believe he's actually an admirer of President Kagame, what assurances has sought from the Rwandan government in the respect for them to respect the sovereignty of its neighbours in the region, lest we provoke a wider humanitarian crisis in the Great Lakes?
Mr. Speaker, I expect to see within the next 24 hours the Foreign Minister of Rwanda, and I will say to him what we say to all of those who are engaged in fighting or profiteering or causing human misery in the eastern DRC. I will say that we urge everyone to be part of the Nairobi and indeed the Luanda peace process. We urge everyone to lay down their weapons and to allow a peace process there, which can also ensure that humanitarian aid can reach people who desperately need it.
We now come to the statements. Minister Tom Paslow.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. And with your permission, I'll make a statement on the progressive delivery of cost of living support. The Government understands the pressures that households face in the current climate. We're all familiar with the global factors that are the root cause of costs being higher, including President Putin's illegal war in Ukraine and the aftermath of the pandemic. We are committed to delivering on our priority to halve inflation, which will help ease those pressures for everyone and raise living standards. Alongside this important work, we're continuing to implement our wide-ranging and significant package of cost of living measures to support the most vulnerable during 2023 and 2024, with increased benefits and state pensions by 10.1%, and increase the benefit cap by the same amount so that more people are helped by the uprating. For low-paid workers, we've increased the national living wage by 9.7% to £10.42 an hour. This represents an increase of over £1,600 to the gross annual earnings of a full-time worker on the national living wage. This increase and the increases we made to the national minimum wage in April have given a pay rise to around 2.9 million workers. To help parents, we're undertaking a significant expansion of childcare, which will include the maximum amount of childcare payments people can get on universal credit, rising by nearly 50% later this month. For the most vulnerable, the £842 million extension of our household support fund into 2023-24 means councils across England can continue to help families with the costs of groceries, bills and other essentials. When you take into account the extra money we've provided through Barnett funding for Scotland, Wales and Northern Ireland, who can decide how they allocate this, we've committed an extra £1 billion. This is on top of what we've already provided since October 2021 and brings total funding to £2.5 billion. With one of the biggest worries for families being energy bills, the energy price guarantee will also remain in place as a safety net until the end of March 2024, should energy price increases significantly during this period. Since this energy bill support began in October 2022, the Government has covered around half of a typical household energy bill this past winter, and by the end of June will have saved a typical household around £1,500. And we're building on and extending the one-off cash payments we provided during 2022-23 that saw us make over 30 million cost of living payments, including a £150 disability cost of living payment to 6 million people, up to £650 for over 8 million households on means-tested benefits, an additional £300 on top of the winter fuel payment for over 8 million pensioner households. This puts hundreds of pounds directly and at pace into the pockets of millions of people. However, we do recognise that cost of living pressures continue, particularly for the most vulnerable households. That's why we're continuing to provide targeted support to help those most impacted by rising prices throughout this financial year. That includes more support for people on means-tested benefits such as universal credit, with up to free cost of living payments totalling up to £900. The government has already delivered the first £301 payment to 8.3 million households, support worth £2.5 billion. The two further payments of £300 and £299 will be made in the autumn and in the spring. And pensioner households will get an additional £300 on top of their annual winter fuel payments this winter, as they did last. And I'm pleased to be able to confirm to the House that to help with the additional costs disabled people face, from today, over 6 million people across the UK on eligible extra cost disability benefits will start to receive £150 disability cost of living payments. These cash payments, which we estimate will be worth for around £1 billion, will be automatically transferred into people's bank accounts, so those eligible for the support do not need to take any action. By the end of Monday, the 26th of June, we plan to have made 99% of payments to those already eligible. That's millions of payments being made in just 7 days. Most remaining already eligible people will receive their payment by the 4th of July. We estimate that nearly 60% of individuals who receive an extra cost disability benefit will also receive the means-tested benefit cost of living payment, and over 85% will receive either or both of the means-tested and pensioner payments. This government will always protect the most vulnerable, but we're also helping to improve living standards for everyone by getting more people into and progressing in better paid jobs. This is the surest and most sustainable way to raise incomes and grow the economy. The number of people in employment is increased to a record high, but by removing the barriers that stop people from working, we are reducing the number of people who are economically inactive, those neither working nor actively looking for work. It's encouraging that last week's labour market statistics show a further fall in inactivity of 140,000, or 0.4% on the quarter. Mr. Speaker, we are tackling inflation to help manage the cost of living for all households and providing extra targeted support for those that need it. The disability cost of living payments landing in millions of bank accounts from today as part of our wider support package underline our commitment to supporting disabled people, something that is also reflected in how we are stepping up our employment support for disabled people and people with health conditions, ensuring people can access the right support at the right time and have a better overall experience when applying for and receiving health and disability benefits, and transforming the health and disability benefits system so that it focuses on what people can do rather than on what they cannot. It's also reflected in the fact that we expect to spend over £78 billion in 2023-24 on benefits to support disabled people and those with health conditions. That's 3.1% of GDP. With the government's significant package of cost of living support, worth over £94 billion in 2022-23 and 2023-24, we are ensuring that those most in need are protected from the worst impacts from rising prices and are putting more pounds in people's pockets and providing some peace of mind to the most vulnerable in society.
Secretary of State, Jonathan Ashworth.
Full, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the Minister for advance sight of his statement. But let's be clear. The Minister has come to the House today and he's asking us to congratulate him for this payment when after 13 years the number of disabled people living in poverty is up by over 1 million. He's asking us to congratulate him on this payment when almost every day now we hear stories of disabled people cutting back on hot meals, on showers, on washing their clothes, because otherwise they would not be able to afford to use the equipment that helps them get by in life. He's asking us to congratulate him when after 13 years of Conservative government, child poverty is up by 600,000, pensioner poverty is up 400,000. He's asking us to congratulate him when we have a cost of living crisis now so severe that today's Foundation report that nearly 6 are forced to skip meals, and 7 million of the poorest families are going without food, heating, or even basic toiletries. Now, he talks about employment. There are 2.5 million people out of work for reasons of sickness or disability. The Working Age Disability Benefit Bill is going to go up to around 25 billion. But many people out of work want to work. That's why we've proposed an into-work guarantee welfare reform to help people move off sickness benefits and into work. But instead of offering help now to people out of work, they're actually cutting disability employment advisors by 10%. And for those disabled people in work, because the government is failing to do its part in helping tame inflation, disabled people in work and families are seeing the value of their wages ravaged by inflation. And in fact, the value of this disability payment is actually now worth £5 less in real terms than when the Chancellor announced it in the autumn statement because of inflation. So the government is failing to play its part in helping tame inflation. And when combined with them running the economy off the cliff last autumn, combined with policies that led to turmoil on the markets, a run on pension funds, that means today thousands of disabled people, thousands of working families, even pensioners, are living in fear of that letter they will soon be getting this year telling them it's time to remortgage. And disabled people and families are facing hundreds, indeed thousands of pounds more on their refinanced mortgage over the coming years. 1.3 million homes this year collectively paying 10 billion extra on mortgages, a Tory mortgage premium that disabled homeowners, families are paying the price, literally paying the price for 13 years of Tory economic failure. So my question is very, very simple. When so many disabled people, when so many families are facing more on their mortgage because of decisions taken by this government, how on earth does he expect them to cope?
Minister.
Well, I'm obviously appreciative to the Shadow Secretary of State for taking the time to come and respond to this statement today. And on the fundamental point of supporting people properly, I don't think that there is a disagreement between us. We disagree on the detail of this, and I think it is substantial and significant that, as I set out in my earlier remarks, we are providing £94 billion worth of comprehensive cost of living support to people over the course of 22-23 and into 23-24. That is structured support that is hitting people's bank accounts in the way that I've described, including that latest tranche of support through the disability cost of living payments, but also that discretionary support that is able to be provided through local authorities to meet the needs that exist where they don't necessarily neatly fit into those structured support packages. That is significant support, and he should welcome it. I also was very interested to hear what he had to say about our employment-related measures. I would be absolutely delighted if he were to come forward and welcome the structural reform that this government is determined to make to help support more disabled people and people with health conditions into work, removing that jeopardy that they feel around the benefits system to smooth that journey, as well as the tailored support that we want to provide alongside that to improve that journey through the system and to unlock people's aspirations, namely in the form of universal support, that tried and tested supported employment model through individual placement and support in primary care in the first year, but growing beyond that. That is welcome support that will identify people's needs and support them on a case-by-case basis to meet those objectives, and of course all the benefits that that brings, as well as keeping people well in work and the Work Well partnerships building capacity alongside NHS services. They are meaningful interventions on the supply side that this government is making, and I think are to be welcomed, and it would have been nice for him to welcome that structured, more permanent support that we want to provide to help people to live more fulfilling lives with employment at the heart of that. He also effectively alluded to the fact that the United Kingdom stands alone in these challenges. That is absolutely not the case. I was at the United Nations last week representing our country, and it's fair to say that in many of the conversations that I had, the challenges that we are facing were repeated in their countries, not just in Europe, but much further afield too. And for example, in the US, the Federal Reserve has increased rates at the fastest pace since the 1980s. And in Europe, interest rates are at their highest level in more than 2 decades. And what we will do is take a responsible approach. The Chancellor of the Exchequer set that out in questions just now. What we will not be doing is making unaffordable spending pledges which will simply lead to higher rates in the long term. That is not the way of addressing these issues effectively. And on the specific issue of mortgages, again, what we mustn't do is do anything that only fuels those challenges that households face. And there are a number of changes that we've made, including through support for mortgage interest and the scheme around that. And for example, from April this year, claimants can be eligible for SMI from 3 months instead of 9. We've also abolished the zero earnings rule to allow claimants to continue receiving support while in work and on UC. And the interest rate we pay is based on the Bank of England published average mortgage rates, which increased from 2.09 to 2.65 on the 10th of May 23. And we, of course, continue to have important and receptive engagement with lenders about that support. I think what is really clear, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that with the opposition, they either have no plan or an uncosted plan. The latter would simply fuel inflation and make matters worse. In contrast, what we will get on and do is we will provide the support that we've outlined that is comprehensive, that is meeting people's needs, but of course we keep that package under constant review. But we're also focused on our fundamental mission, which is to bring inflation down in the way we've described.
Sir Jake Berry.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I congratulate the Minister on what is a meaningful package and particularly will be of help to disabled constituents of mine in Rosendale and Darwin. But will he accept that these measures which put money back in people's pocket when they're reliant on benefits will not dent the challenges that people are facing when it comes to their mortgage going up by hundreds of pounds a week or a month? And will he then go on and speak to his friends at the Treasury and talk to them about reintroducing mortgage interest relief at source, which is a true Conservative way of tackling the cost of living crisis by cutting taxes and putting money back in the pockets of the squeezed middle?
Well, my honourable friend is trying to tempt me to make commitments on behalf of the Treasury today, which of course I'm not able to do. But what I am able to do is, of course, ensure that the point that he has made in this debate is relayed to Treasury colleagues. And again, there are ongoing conversations being had involving my honourable friend, my colleague, the member for Mid Sussex, who leads on housing within the DWP, with colleagues in DLUC, for example, around some of the challenges that people are facing with regard to housing. And I know that she is working proactively on this along with colleagues elsewhere.
Spokesperson David Linden.
Thank you very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I too thank the Minister for advance sight of his statement, although in reality the statement is a 9-page press release rehashed of previous government announcements. The only new thing today is that £150 disability payment, and I think I would ask the Minister to reflect on the excellent report from Scope about the disability price tag that shows that on average disabled households have expenditure that is £975 higher per month. We know, for example, that as a result of specialised diets, higher transport costs, higher energy costs, higher insurance premiums, that there is a cost to disabled people. And unfortunately, this government does not have a good record when it comes to disabled people, particularly the 2.5 million legacy benefit claimants who were so cruelly overlooked during the pandemic and did not get the equivalent £20 uplift. As I say, I welcome the £150, but I would ask the Minister to reflect on the wise words of Scope, who say that this will not touch the sides. And so to that end, as I think that the government is not quite getting this, can I invite the Minister to come to Glasgow to meet with myself and the Glasgow Disability Alliance, where he will hear a message that is loud and clear that this simply does not go far enough and that far too many people are going to struggle unless the government ups its game.
I think the key point that I would make to him, and I set this out in my introductory statement, is the fact that there is a significant alignment between people receiving the disability cost of living payment who are also receiving various other parts of the support package, and that figure stands at 85% who qualify for the disability cost of living payment are also receiving the means tested or the pensioner cost of living payment. So they are receiving various parts of the package of support. We do, of course, continue to keep these matters under constant review, as you would expect. And I've got a meeting later today, actually, with the Scottish Minister and the Scottish Government, where no doubt these matters relating to the cost of living will come up. Certainly, as a Minister in the Department for Work and Pensions, I am committed and determined to visit all parts of the United Kingdom, and I will take away his suggestion about where I might come.
Stuart.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I re-emphasise the point made by my right honourable friend, the member for Rossendale and Darwin? I'm getting huge numbers of constituents coming to me about the mortgage changes. They are absolutely terrified. I know the government's doing all it can, but can I ask the government to redouble its efforts, because this is going to have a huge impact on cost of living?
Can I also just thank my honourable and gallant friend for his question, and this is a significant issue in his constituency. It is a challenge in constituencies across the country, and I know that ministers across government are mindful of it, but I think it draws focus back to actually the key overarching missions of this government and the economic plan that the Chancellor and the Prime Minister are advancing. It is why it is so critical that we tackle these inflationary pressures. We mustn't add to those inflationary pressures, because if we can deal with that root cause, that is the best way to help people in that situation.
Department of Work and Pensions Select Committee, Sir Stephen Timms.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The cost of living payments have made a vital contribution to millions of families in supporting people through the current crisis, and I welcome the contribution that they've made. But the need for them does reflect, particularly following the removal of the £20 a week uplift from universal credit, the historically low headline level of benefits at the moment, in real terms the lowest for 40 years. What consideration is he giving with his colleagues in the department to consolidating those occasional one-off payments into the mainstream benefits, universal credit and the rest, so that people can budget with confidence week by week?
Well, of course, he will recognise that my right honourable friend, the Secretary of State, has his annual review of benefits and pension levels, where, of course, all matters are properly considered in the usual way. Decisions are made and they're announced through those formal processes. I think it is just worth saying, in relation to disability spending more generally, that total disability spending in 27-28 is forecast to be over £41.6 billion higher in real terms compared to 2010. We are spending very, very significant sums of money around support for disabled people. We've also got those cost of living packages of support in place for them as well, and what we will continue to do is be on the side of helping people through this difficult time, supporting where we can, cushioning the impacts of these challenges. But again, I would invite colleagues opposite to really join in with the support for the overarching mission of this government, which is to get inflation down and to relieve these pressures.
Aaron Bell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Could I welcome my right honourable friend's statement? Could I also welcome the £150 that he mentioned is going into the bank accounts of 6 million people, including many of my constituents in Newcastle under Lyme? Could I also welcome all the support he outlined, including on energy bills for the entire country, households and businesses over the winter? And I welcome that energy bills are about to start falling at last, which I know will be very welcome to everybody across this House. But does my right honourable friend agree that the best way for us to help the most vulnerable is to try and help them into well-paid, sustainable jobs, whether part-time or full-time, and that we should look for support from employers for adaptations and managing conditions in doing that?
I have to say, I totally agree with my honourable friend. Work is such an important part in relieving some of these pressures, but it's also important for people in the longer term too. We want to see more people unlocking their potential, accessing all the benefits and opportunity that work brings. We see that as a partnership. We want to continue to deepen that commitment as a government, working collaboratively with employers to unlock those opportunities. Schemes like Access to Work Plus, which we've piloted and evaluated and we're now getting on and rolling out, is all about crafting roles, working with an individual, working with an employer where there's a determination to employ a disabled person, because we see massive benefit in that approach, not just for the business and for our economy, but also for the disabled person in question.
Debbie Abrahams.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I rise in support of what my colleague, the Right Honourable Member for East Ham has just said. We cannot underestimate the impact of the last 12 years of cuts to the baseline in support and social security, 33 billion taken out of working age budgets, which these temporary one-off payments don't even cut the sides and is resulting in 1 in 3 disabled people living in poverty, twice the non-disabled numbers as well. So again, can I ask the question that my right honourable friend put to the member? When will you be increasing the uplift?
Well, I would repeat what I said in response to the earlier question from the Select Committee Chairman. The point I would also just want to get across is that we are determined to try and get to grips with these longer-term pressures that people face. I recognise, and the Shadow SNP spokesman mentioned the disability price tag research that has been carried out by Scope. One of those pressures is, of course, around energy costs. And, for example, one of the things that colleagues in the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero are looking at the moment is the whole-scale market reforms of our energy market. One of the issues that they are considering as part of that is this issue of social tariffs and support, to see how we best support those costs on a longer term. But again, the best way of tackling these issues in the round and getting these pressures down is by addressing the inflationary challenge that we are currently experiencing. That is what government is focused on doing at the moment. That is the right approach. But on the wider matter that was mentioned in response to the Select Committee's question, we will take that away and be considered in the usual way as part of the annual process.
Wendy Chamberlain.
Deputy Speaker, the Scope disability price tag has already been mentioned, and the £975 a month means that £150 in extra payment doesn't even cover a week of additional costs, and certainly counts to the lack of sufficiency for Social Security that the Chair of the Select Committee referred to. In terms of my Carers Leave Act, the Private Members Bill that's recently passed, when I met with constituents, they'd either had to give up work because of their caring responsibilities or had lost carers allowance because of the hours they were working. The Minister talks about a transformation of the system. Does he agree that carers allowance is ripe for reform?
We've had exchanges in relation to carers allowance previously. The approach that we take in relation to this is, of course, to consider that when we have our deliberations around annual uprating, and we make modification to that when it is affordable and appropriate. But I hear her representation. And can I also just congratulate her on her care leave bill, which is, of course, an important change that is being introduced. And I know a lot of effort has gone into that behind the scenes, and I congratulate her on it.
Derek Twigg.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Madam Deputy Speaker, I can't recall such a time I had so many families and individuals contacting my office because they just cannot afford to live, whether that's being able to buy food, heat the house, or do other things as a family. We have seen, of course, the start of some falling energy prices, but the fact remains, Madam Deputy Speaker, is that for the foreseeable future they will be much higher than they were before the start of this crisis. We're now also seeing problems with the interest rate and various other pressures on families. But can I ask the Minister this question in particular? Rents are outstripping local housing allowance by quite a considerable amount in my local area. People are being evicted. So on the housing front, we've got the pressures from the interest rates which are starting to bite, and we've got the problem that people can't afford the rents that are being charged now in the private sector. What is the Minister going to do about that?
If I may, on that specific point, I would, of course, draw to his attention the points that I made earlier about some of the work that is ongoing, but I will also ask my honourable friend, the member for Mid Sussex, to provide him with a response to that question, because I know that she is currently engaging with colleagues elsewhere in government around those challenges.
Thank
you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Minister has already acknowledged the additional costs of nearly £1,000 a month that disabled households have over able-bodied households. But of course, those costs are disproportionately higher in rural areas, such as the Highlands, where I represent my constituency, and people there have extra costs for transport, for additional energy costs, etc. Isn't it time that the government did more to compensate those people who have those extreme costs? And wouldn't a start be to make up for what they lost with the universal credit mismatch during the pandemic, and indeed restore that £20 a week on universal credit immediately?
Well, there's no plan to restore that £20 uplift in the way that he describes, but I would certainly, in relation to disability benefits, draw his attention to the statistics and the figures that I set out earlier. There will also be, as I've announced previously, an evaluation of the cost of living payments in the autumn that will take into account a whole host of factors, no doubt, and will be thorough going at that. But also the disability unit I'm working with to have a very close look at the costs that people are experiencing during this cost of living challenge, because we of course want to learn from those challenges for the future.
Lynn Brown.
Madam Deputy Speaker, when visiting schools, I'm told by young children that it's not their turn to eat tonight. Schools tell me that pupils take leftovers from school friends so they can eat a lunch. Rents are rocketing. Households are paying almost £1,000 a year more on food than they did in 2021. Does the Minister honestly think that the support that the government is offering is enough to stop rising hunger in constituencies like mine?
One thing I, of course, recognise is that food prices is a challenge not just here in the United Kingdom but abroad too. And for example, I'm aware that obviously the percentage here is 19%, but in Europe food inflation within the EU is at 19%, and in the euro area it is 18%. These are significant challenges that people are experiencing, not just here but abroad as well. And I've, for example, seen reports just today of retailers discounting products to try and help with some of these pressures, which of course goes beyond the package of support that the government is providing. That £94 billion figure is not insignificant. And we of course continue to also support families on a case-by-case basis through the Household Support Fund, and I would encourage her to signpost her constituents to that support as well, because where people have particular needs and challenges, they are able to be supported through that help.
Nathan Edwards.
Madam Deputy Speaker, he mentioned in his statement support with energy bills. Earlier this week I received an email from my constituent from the village of Capelhendre in my constituency. Now Capelhendre is on the mains gas network, but a large proportion of households use alternative fuels such as heating oil. And this constituent, this meant that the payment on the alternative fuel wasn't made directly through electricity bills. They had to apply for it. Now she's missed the deadline for the alternative fuel payment scheme. Will he raise, I know it's not his direct responsibility, but will he raise it with the Energy Minister that there is a cohort of people that have missed out? And is there a possibility of reopening the scheme so constituents can get their entitled support?
Well, I commend him for his nifty way of getting that important question into the proceedings this afternoon. Perhaps if he could share those details with me, I will gladly make sure that that reaches the Minister responsible in the Department for Energy Security and Net Zero.
Marsha de Cordova.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I think it's just worth noting that the UK government were the first government to be investigated by the UN Committee on the Rights of Disabled People for their treatment of disabled people. We all know the additional costs that disabled people face as a fact, higher energy bills and so forth, and the disability price tag is around £975 extra a month. Now, we know the woeful support of this cost of living payment will not go anywhere near to meeting those additional needs. So why on earth does the Minister think that it is enough? We don't need any more analysis. The evidence is there. Why can he not take action now?
I would again just reiterate the point that people are often receiving multiple parts of the comprehensive cost of living support that we are providing. And she also made the point about the UN. Well, my experience from speaking to counterparts across the world at the UN last week and being involved in the discussions there was actually people often look to the United Kingdom as being a world leader on these matters. I think it is important to make that point in the context of the comment that the Honourable Lady has just made. The fact is that we are continuing to keep under review the support that is provided. We will continue to keep under review the support that is provided. We'll continue to keep under review the package of support that is provided, but I think it is worth recognising that people often receive multiple parts of the package alongside the disability cost of living payment.
Marion Fellows.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. It was a real pleasure to listen to the Honourable member on my right. She's always very eloquent when it comes to disabled people. We've heard already about their support, £150 extra, and I have to thank the Minister for that. It is literally better than nothing. So many disabled people are trying to get into work because they have to work to be able to afford the basics in life. So there's a disability income gap, as the Minister will be aware. And can I ask the Minister, will he look back on his white paper, because he missed out the thing about the delays that people are now waiting to get support from access to work. It's important impossible almost. People are losing jobs day and daily, disabled people, because they cannot get the support they need when they need it. So will the Minister review that and try to help disabled people be able to afford more?
Yeah. The Honourable Lady knows, because we meet regularly to talk about these issues, my absolute determination to deliver on greater employment opportunities for disabled people. In fact, as I said earlier, I'm meeting with the Scottish Minister later today, where this issue will absolutely come up and it's on the agenda. I hope that we can move forward with our reforms in a constructive, collaborative manner so they benefit people across the United Kingdom to their fullest extent, and certainly on access to work. What we are doing is there is additional resource being put onto access to work to get through applications quicker, and a number of process changes have also been made which are in the early stages, but the anecdotal commentary that I'm receiving from officials is that actually what we're seeing with some of these changes is that they are seeing cases processed much more quickly.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Resolution Foundation estimates that mortgage payers will pay an average of £2,900 in the next year due to increases in interest rates. 13% of retirees